All right, guys, welcome back to Always Moving Forward. We've had another really awesome week. I want to thank everybody who has been, a big instrumental part of the show, which is subscribing and watching every week and just commenting and really encouraging us. We are excited to announce that we hit our goal of the 1,000 subscribers. We actually surpassed that. We're really excited about that. So remember, as you see in the shows, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit like, share, and then comment and make sure you hit that notification bell too. So as new shows come out, you can also be notified for the new shows. So today, I am really excited about my next guest. My next guest is someone that I've been talking to back and forth on LinkedIn for quite a while, and been trying to get him to come on the show, and I'm so excited he's agreed to do that. So I'm going to bring in my guest, Brian Cuban. How's it going, Brian?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am doing awesome. Like I said, I'm really excited about having you on the show. We talked a little bit, going back and forth on LinkedIn. So I've heard a little bit about your story. And so I'm excited for my audience to get to know you as a person, and kind of what you've gone through. And some of the stuff that you're currently working on. So, like I said, I've been waiting for this interview because I really believe you have such a powerful story to tell.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to share it.
Cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump into it. What I normally do is I'll ask the guests kind of where they were born and raised, and we'll talk about what life was like kind of when you were younger, when
Sure.
you were growing up.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a baby boomer. Back when cell phones were two cups attached to a string, and so social networking was playing dodgeball on the basketball blacktop, right?
Right.
And I'm the middle of three boys. People may know my older brother Mark Cuban, Shark Tank and the Mavs, and I have a younger brother Jeff Cuban. And our father, we grew up a very middle class lifestyle, privileged but middle class. He basically worked at an auto trim shop, and what an auto trim shop is where they put on convertible tops and they reupholster car seats,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Right.
And so it was very, very middle class. And basically, more to give you a good sense of it, Mark was, as the firstborn, was very outgoing, and as you might imagine, very entrepreneurial even at a young age, selling this door to door, selling that door to door in his teens. I remember our local newspaper went on strike. The Pittsburgh Press and the Post Gazette went on strike.
Oh, well.
And he and his buddies, barely old enough to drive, drove out to Cleveland. And they bought copies of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, drove them back to downtown Pittsburgh, and sold them on a street corner for twice what they paid for them. So you kind of knew what he was going to be.
Right. Right.
My younger brother, Jeff, was a nationally ranked wrestler, good looking kid, a jock, the beer parties, the dates, the prom, all that kind of stuff. And I was very shy. I was classic middle child syndrome.
Okay.
I was shy. I was withdrawn. I tended towards isolation. And I had a very negative self image. And I kind of internalized things that were negative, things said about me in the negative, and wore it as who I was, like kind of like a skin tight suit.
Right.
And growing up, I also had a difficult relationship with my mom. And it's important to understand this, to understand my life path. But I want to make it clear to anyone who watches this that I do not blame my mother, my parents, or anyone for the things that I went through.
Right.
Parents don't cause mental health issues. There's a difference between cause and correlation.
Right.
And so things that happen in the home could and can cause mental health issues for one person, but it won't for another.
Right.
And so there was a lot of fat shaming in my household. My mom used to come home from selling real estate, and I would come home from lunch and I would open up the can of Chef Boyardee beefaroni or SpaghettiOs or ravioli with the old style can opener.
Right.
Right? Stick the spoon in, and my mom would come home, walk in the kitchen, and every now and then, not all the time, would say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, these were the things my grandmother said to my mom, and these were the things I'm sure my great grandmother said to my grandmother.
Right.
Fat shaming is often handed down generationally in families. My lineage, I come from a Jewish Eastern European family. My grandmother on my mom's side, they came from Lithuania. They were very poor. There was a very dysfunctional relationship around food, kind of the stereotypical Jewish grandmother, eat, 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 right?
Right.
So, but and my mother also had a very mentally and verbally abusive relationship with her mother, who was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic.
Oh, okay.
And so, not understanding these things, as my mother dealt with her own mental health issues at a time where no woman talked about any of these things, right? Back in the early 70s, very, very stigmatized. And I grew depressed, and I began to eat more Chef Boyardee ravioli and more Chef Boyardee, and I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And as so often happens when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative at school, the bullying started. Back then, though, going viral when 15 kids in the lunchroom knew about something.
Right.
Much different than today. And so I would go to school, and now I was heavy. I was bordering on obese. And Brian, you're a fat pig, and I would get bullied severely.
Right.
And Brian, you need to go to Sears and get a bra for your man boobs.
Wow.
And the bullying all culminated in what I call the day of the gold pants. My freshman year in high school, 1976, it was the beginning of the disco era. And do you remember have you seen Saturday Night Fever?
Yes. John Travolta.
With John Travolta, and it became a hit in 1976, going into 77. And the disco took off, right? And my brother Mark taught disco, believe it or not, at this club in downtown Pittsburgh.
Wow.
And he would always come home with these bell-bottom pants with different, flowers and platform shoes and all this stuff that was perfectly normal back then.
Right.
And if you were in a disco. And one day he gave me a pair of these pants of his, a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants, believe it or not. And the pants fit Mark okay. He wasn't a big guy. But I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out. But I didn't care because my brother gave me these pants, these disco pants, and I love my brother, and I was going to wear those pants to school, and I did.
Right.
And as you might imagine, the kids made fun of them, and I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor as kind of a wall, so these kids and the bullies wouldn't know how much this hurt me. Because you have to remember, this is well before the internet. My images of popularity were the kids I saw every day.
Right.
The kids who were going on their first date, the kids who were being invited to the football games, the after-school parties, right? The kids who were getting their first kiss, and all of those things. These were the things that I wanted, and I associated with acceptance. And the bullying all culminated when I was walking home from school with a group of these kids who were the popular kids, but also kind of bully kids, because I felt if I kind of hung around on the outside of them, it would be like kind of a fraternity hazing, right? Well, one day after just torturing me, they'd say, "You're one of us now, Cubes." But that's not how bullying works.
Yeah.
And I'm walking home from school with them about a mile from my house on the sidewalk wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. They're making fun of them. One of them starts pulling at the zipper area, and it tears.
Wow.
Another one reaches out and grabs it and pulls a little more, and it tears a little more right along the zipper.
Right.
The next thing I know, these kids have all joined in. They're tearing at my pants like a pack of wild dogs, and they ripped these pants off me, tore them into shreds, and threw them out in a busy street down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt, my 3-ring Keds tube socks, and my Keds tennis shoes.
Wow.
They went on down the sidewalk like they had done the funniest thing ever. I walked out in the street, cars just whizzing by, very busy street. Walk out, gathering up the shreds, cover up my tighty whities, waddle home, People gawked, they're looking at me, and no one stopped. The most embarrassing part of the walk home was when I was at the stoplight, right? You're standing there in your underwear.
Right.
People were looking at me like, what's going on? But no one said anything. No one rolled down the window and said, are you okay? And I got home, and the house was empty. My mom was out selling real estate. My dad was a few miles away working on the cars. Mark and Jeff were wherever.
Right.
And so it was funeral quiet. I walked down into the basement, down these blue old wooden stairs of the house we just sold just a month and a half ago after my mom passed away. We just sold it.
Right.
And with each creak of these stairs, I felt like it reverberated out where everyone at the high school I went to, Mount Lebanon High School, knew what had happened to me.
Wow.
My father knew what had happened to me. My brothers knew what had happened to me. My mother knew what had happened to me. The whole world knew. These creaks were reverberating into the world, the ripples of my shame.
Right.
Going out like the ripples on the lake on the water on the lake. And I found a wastebasket, and I stuffed these, and I buried these shreds of my pants at the bottom of the wastebasket, hoping no one would ever ask about it, and it would bury my shame. But that's not how trauma works. Trauma threads, trauma remembers, the body keeps the score. And it was right around then, 1976, that I remember after that instant starting to see my reflection in the bathroom mirror, in the car window, in the mall window, and seeing a fat pig who would never be loved by his mother, who loved me dearly, but was dealing with her own mental health issues, who would never get married, have a girlfriend, and was not deserving of love on any level, and certainly not deserving to love myself. And that is what I saw in the mirror. And that is one of the bright line moments of my life back then.
Wow.
That kind of shaped who I was going forward. My freshman year in high school.
Wow.
So as you might imagine, I was pretty happy to get out of high school.
Right. So let me ask you real quick. So at that time, did you not have like any friends that you can like really confide in, or someone that you felt like you could talk to and
No,
share?
I mean I was 16 years old. Who was You weren't going to tell your friends that. So I could tell them I was a weak kid who couldn't stand up to bullies. I mean, you have to remember this was before there was bullying awareness. This is when you looked in the back of the Archie common book and saw the huge muscle guy kicking the sand in the face of the little guy.
Right.
Back in the day when they had the comic book ads. So no, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell a soul. Not my family, not my brothers, not my friends.
Wow. And you're right. I mean, back then there was no self-awareness of the way people talked and treated each other.
There were different gender roles too. There were different gender expectations. I mean, men were strong, men were the earners, men were the leaders, men were not weak. Men did not allow themselves to get bullied.
Right. Well, and just the way that people talk to one another, they didn't have the self-awareness of what they say could hurt somebody. You know what I mean? And you're right. It goes back to, like our parents and their parents and their parents, you know what I mean? The way that their parents talk to them and their grandparents talk to them.
Well, there's also a level, when you get on the teenage level, there's a level of kids being kids, right? It doesn't make it any easier. Kids bully today, and it's much worse because it's on the internet by a million people you don't even know, or TikTok or Instagram or wherever, right?
Right.
It's all these people you don't even know, and it's driven children and teens to suicide. But so there was, I mean, kids are always going to be kids, and teens are always going to be teens, because the brain doesn't develop until you're 25 or 26.
Right.
So I don't want to blame it all on that, because it still goes on today.
Right.
Although there's much more awareness in the schools, in the homes, and I think people try to address it differently. People educate about it differently. There was no education back then.
Right.
So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so you end up, you graduated school, and then
I went on to Penn State University, thrilled to get out of Pittsburgh, away from the bullies.
Right.
And I was so happy. It was going to be a whole new Brian. I was going to maybe have a girlfriend, make friends, and it was I was gonna start my life over at 18 years old. Actually,
Right.
it was 17 going on 18. And so my father drove me up to Penn State University. And I remember I was living in a dorm with three other guys. And first day, freshman first, everyone's unpacking. And I'm looking out in the parking lot of my dorm. My father's in the dorm helping me unpack my stuff. And there are all these people out in the parking lot. And it was this beautiful fall day, looking out this window, the size of this rectangular window.
Right.
And I make eye contact with this curly brown haired girl who's talking to two of her friends, and her parents are unpacking their car.
Right.
And I start sweating. And I imagine my entire life with this girl in about 15 seconds.
Oh,
We're
wow.
going to date, we're going to get married, and we're going to have 2 1/2 children. and and my life is great, all in
Right.
15 seconds. And she looks at me, looks at her friend, and in that 2 seconds after that 15, I had a sickening feeling in my stomach. It wasn't a smile, it was a smirk.
Wow.
She put her hands over her mouth, just like this. Ugly, ugly. Now,
Wow.
I'm not the first kid to have a nasty thing said to him. It happens all the time. Another kid may have said ugly back. Another kid may have given her the salute. Another kid may have done whatever, right? We
Right.
all respond the way we're genetically, environmentally, and socially programmed. I don't blame that girl either. So for what I went through, but I already felt ugly. Not that girl's fault, but I remember thinking she's right. I am ugly.
Wow.
What does this ugly kid have control over so I will no longer be ugly? How can I no longer be ugly to her? How can I no longer be ugly to all the girls back in high school, to all the girls that I wanted to meet in college? Well, I have to get thin. If I lose weight, I will no longer be ugly and I will no longer hate myself. So I began to restrict my food intake and restrict, bringing it down to near starvation intake. And
Wow.
before I knew it, and I quickly transitioned into binging and purging. And before I knew it, going into 1980, I was a male with an eating disorder.
Wow.
Yes, guys do get eating disorders. Up to half of all those with eating disorders are male, but you didn't know that. And but this was in 1979, going on 1980. This was before anyone was talking about eating disorders for men and women. The wonderful singer Karen Carpenter of the Carpenters would pass away for complications related to anorexia in 1983. So that was 4 years later, 3 years later, going on four
Right.
years later. This was before that. No one was talking about it because her death would bring eating disorders into the pre-digital national spotlight.
Right.
So all I knew was that every time I binged and purged, I felt okay about myself for a few seconds. For a few seconds, the next day was going to be okay. For the few seconds, that girl would like me. But then those few seconds went away, and then swept the shame of engaging in an act that I did not have a name for, did not understand, but I knew guys didn't do that. Just
Right.
instinctively. No one told me guys didn't do that. It just felt not masculine. But
Right.
I had to have that feeling of peace again and again and again. And so that was my beginnings and into descent into an eating disorder that would last over 2 decades.
Wow. So how was you able to finally overcome something like that after doing that for so long?
A lot of therapy when I went into recovery. A lot of therapy, but it didn't end there.
Yeah.
I quickly descended into drinking heavily at Penn State,
Right.
and before I knew it, at Penn State, I was an alcoholic. I would drink alone in my dorm, and then when I moved out into the apartments, I drank alone in my apartments. I would go out into the alleys with a little bottle of tequila after I turned 21 and was old enough to buy liquor, and I would drink these little bottles of tequila. I'd chug them just
Wow.
to go into a bar, thinking, okay, I'll get drunk out here so I could go into the bar and be a different person. But I'd
Right.
go into the bar and just drink more and leave ashamed,
Wow.
and leave feeling worse.
Right.
And I remember the closest I ever came to any epiphany on that I might have a problem back then is walking into a hamburger joint, drunk, of course,
Right.
and coming across a rack of pamphlets that the 12-step groups put out called the 20 Questions.
Right.
And for those who don't know, the most well-known 12-step group is AA, but there are others. There are
Right.
others. And it was geared towards college students. And, do you black out? Do you miss class? And answering yes, checking off mentally yes to all these little boxes in my mind. And I just said, I'm a college student. We all drink. Threw it in a wastebasket. That was it. I was as close as I ever came.
Wow.
And so I spent my years at Penn State as a problem drinker, a severe problem drinker, an alcoholic. Didn't no one ever stepped up, and back then there was only 12-step, right?
Right.
You were either in 12-step, you were in a hospital ward, or you weren't in recovery, or you were trying to do it on your own. We
Right.
didn't have residential treatment like we have today, and it was very shameful. So there was really no one talking about it, right? So you
Right.
just bore it on your own. And plus, kids drink, so you kind of look like everyone else. And so I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the baby laxative for the blow.
Oh, wow.
And so I remember that I'm looking through these police officer jobs in the placement office. It was my junior year at Penn State.
Okay.
And I'm going on to my senior year. I have to decide what I want to do. I want to be a cop. And I'm looking at all these jobs, and there are two kids sitting next to me in the placement office. And I knew them from the major, and they were from Pittsburgh, like me. And
Right.
they were talking about going to law school, taking the law school admission test.
Okay.
And so I started listening to them. They were talking about applying to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And I closed the books, the pamphlets.
Right.
This is before the computer. So they would send out all the different there would be these pamphlets of all the different police job openings all around the country.
Right.
And the bell started going off in my head. Not the bells of I want to be a lawyer, not the bells of I want to be the next Clarence Darrow, not the bells of I want to emulate Atticus Finch. The bells of law school is 3 years. I can stay in law school. I can stay in school 3 more years, and I can drink. And I was also exercising obsessively. I developed an eating disorder known as exercise bulimia,
Wow.
which is obsessive exercise for this purpose of offsetting calories.
Right.
And so if I stayed in law school, I wouldn't have to give up all of these behaviors that were kind of my Snoopy line of security blanket that I'd taken through 4 years of school, because I was just seeing the tip of my nose. I couldn't see 3 years out. I just wanted to survive.
Right.
And if I stayed in school 3 more years, it would allow me to survive day to day. And that's the only reason I went to law school. I didn't know any lawyers. There were no lawyers. I'm the first lawyer in my family. That was it. Not a good reason to go. And you think, wow. But I work with a lot of law students, and I talk to law students all the time who are in school for the wrong reasons. They don't want to be there. Maybe not my reasons, but they felt pressured by their parents. All their parents are lawyers. Their brothers and sisters are lawyers.
Right.
For all these different reasons, and they don't want to be there. Right. They're depressed, or they're misusing alcohol. They're a problem drinker. All these different things. And so you do hear that.
Right.
And so I walked through the doors of Pitt Law the fall of 1983 as an alcoholic, struggling with 2 different eating disorders, now also struggling with major depressive episodes. Not quite the recipe for law review or big law or any other, any other excellence at law school. And I graduated by the skin of my teeth, literally bottom of the class, because drinking, running, all those things were more important to me than going to class and studying. And unlike Penn State, in law school, you actually had to study to do well.
That's what I was going to say, because law school, I mean, there's a lot to it. So I was wondering how you were able to keep, to be able to do the stuff you were doing with the drinking and stuff, and still try to maintain, that.
Well, I wasn't trying to maintain. I was the chips were falling where they may.
Okay.
The basically was let the shit fall where it falls, and I did what I did, and I just managed to get through. There wasn't a plan.
Right.
Right. It was as I said about Penn State. I was surviving day to day. There was no 1 month plan or 1 year plan or 2 year plan or 3 year plan.
Wow.
So if I made it, I made it. If I didn't, I did, and I made it by the skin of my teeth. I mean, I still have reoccurring nightmares about going to get my diploma and the dean of the law school pulling it back saying you didn't graduate. But I did. I graduated and got my law degree. And once again, I have to decide, what am I going to do with my life? I decided I was going to move to Dallas, Texas, the fall of 1986. Why? Because my older brother Mark and my younger brother Jeff had already moved here from Pittsburgh.
Right.
And so they were, Jeff was living with Mark at the time. And so with $50 to my name, I got a Greyhound bus ticket, put all my clothes in a duffel bag, and Mark met me at the Greyhound bus station here in Dallas,
Oh, wow.
Labor Day 1986. And I began my journey here.
Wow.
And so when, because I felt that these were the people who didn't judge me, who loved me. And so that would make it okay, right? But it was really throwing gasoline on a fire, because this was the mid 80s. They're young, they're dating, they're going to the bars, they didn't do drugs, but I fit right in.
Right.
And my drinking got worse. They didn't know my problems. I hadn't told them about the bullying or anything like that. They didn't know any of my problems. My drinking got worse. And then in the summer of 1987, in the bathroom of a upscale hotel in downtown Dallas, I discovered the one thing that finally, for the first time in my life, allowed me to look in the mirror and love myself. The first time in my 1987, 26 years, I discovered cocaine.
Wow.
I did my first line of cocaine in that bathroom, looked in the mirror and loved myself, right? I looked in the mirror and everyone loved Brian. I looked in the mirror and my mother loved Brian. I looked in the mirror and all the girls upstairs that I was going to talk to loved Brian. So I walked upstairs and then the high wore off, as happens with cocaine. And now Brian doesn't love Brian anymore. So where's that dealer? Gave the dealer my last $100, got a gram of cocaine, and Brian loved Brian again. Back down in the bathroom. Brian loved Brian again and again. And before I knew it, cocaine and alcohol had taken over my life. I failed the Texas bar exam 3 times, because drugs and alcohol were more important than studying.
Right.
And so that was the beginning. And when I finally passed it, now I'm a lawyer who is also addicted to cocaine, who is an alcoholic. Not quite the resume for the successful practice of law, right?
Right.
And I became kind of a softer Better Call Saul. I became kind of a softer Saul Goodman, getting cases any way I can, ethically or unethically. I know your listeners and watchers may be wondering if I still have my law license. Yes, but it wasn't for lack of trying to lose it. And I say that tongue in cheek, but you look in the back of the Texas Law Journal and it's full of lawyers who have lost their license or it's been suspended, and drugs and alcohol play a huge part.
Wow.
And then in 1991, I got busted for DWI, and that didn't, that was after my first of 3 failed marriages. And I got busted. I was out at this bar, running to the bathroom, doing my lines of cocaine, drinking. And I'm driving home and I'm going up the highway about 70 something miles an hour. And I pass a state trooper, and I say, shit. And I pull off and I see his lights come on and I pull right off the exit. And my house is right there, just like you hear about, right? Walking distance to my house.
Wow.
So he pulls me over, and like any drunk, I don't think I'm drunk. And he says, okay, we'll count it, count backwards. So Z, F, C, D. I did that perfect, right? Okay, yeah, that's great, son. It was this older state trooper. He said, okay, touch your nose. And I'm going, whoa, close your eyes and touch your nose. Whoa. I actually think I walked the line pretty good, but the nose and the backwards alphabet just killed it. And so the handcuffs go on, and he drives me down to, it's called Stare at the jail here in Dallas.
Right.
And we're talking on the way down. I still don't think I'm drunk. And I say, to prove to you that I'm not drunk, I'm going to take the breathalyzer.
Right.
Like any drunk, I'm going to blow to prove to you I didn't think I was drunk. And so I did blow, and I blew a 0.11. And back then it was 0.10, not 0.08.
Right.
And so spent the night in the drunk tank, pled not guilty, as was my right.
Right.
And it turns out this is one of my kind of 9 lives in addiction. The day of trial, my lawyer comes running out of the courtroom with a dismissal. And he said, happy early birthday. The trial was around January, which is my birthday is January 11th. I
Okay.
said, what happened? He said, they said they dismissed the charges. I said, why? Well, the state trooper decided he didn't want to show up. And I heard through the grapevine, so they couldn't bring him to prove up the breathalyzer and testify. And I heard through the grapevine that he had retired and moved out to whatever in Texas, and they couldn't get him to come back.
Right.
And I guess they could have subpoenaed him or whatever, but uh, they just decided to dismiss the charges.
Right.
So I saw, other than the cost of the lawyer, which was a consequence, and paying to get my car out of impound, my solution to that was, okay, I'll stay in my house for 2 weeks. I'm not going to drink for 2 weeks. I'm not going to do blow for 2 weeks, and everything is going to be okay. And as 2 weeks come along, 2 weeks pass, that gets in the rearview mirror, right? And I convinced myself it's a one-off, that I really don't have a problem. And so I'm right back at it. More failed marriages and depression. I began to lose all my clients because I was showing up I was doing cocaine in the state courthouse, the federal courthouse, showing up to hearings under the influence of Xanax and hungover. Word gets around that you're not at your best. So I'm losing. No one ever said anything. No one ever reached out to me.
Wow.
And so I've lost all my clients. My brother Mark put me to work for him. And so now we're up to about 2000 and the year 2000 when he had bought the Dallas Mavericks.
Right.
He said, come work for me and, kind of pull yourself up and things will be good. So I went to work for Mark, not as his lawyer, but kind of just as a jack of all trades. He had me as his point person when they built the American Airlines Center, which Mark had in half interest. So I'm sitting in the construction trailer. I didn't know anything about it, but he's just trying to give me something to do.
Right.
And I'm sitting in this trailer with some of the most important people in Dallas, sometimes drunk, sometimes still high on cocaine, hungover. So he had to pull me out of that. And now here's where privilege comes in. I have skin color privilege, financial privilege, the privilege of having an older brother who loves me dearly, who didn't want to see me living on the street. Mark was just supporting me, paying me a salary. Where I had no clients, I had no way to support myself.
Right.
And in the summer of 2005, I basically lost all hope that I would ever love myself, and that I decided I was a kind of black stain on the Cuban name, and I decided to end my life by suicide.
Wow.
And it was close. A friend of mine who I'd sent a disturbing email alerted my two brothers. They came into my house in my bedroom, and I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. There was cocaine strewn out on the dresser, and alcohol and Xanax pills. My life was basically cocaining through the night and Xanaxing through the day.
Wow.
And they flushed all the drugs. They cleaned up the room, and they dragged me kicking and screaming on my first of 2 trips down to a psychiatric hospital, kicking and screaming. They're trying to save my life, and all I can think of is get out of my life, right? Let me go back to the people who truly care about me, at least until the cocaine is gone. The people I party with. And they weren't having any of that. And so we're down at the psychiatric hospital, and I'm sitting in the room with the psychiatrist, the psychiatric nurse, and my 2 brothers, and I'm screaming, and I'm yelling and blaming them for all my problems, and they're just sitting there listening.
Right.
And it's also dawning on me that they're trying to put a psychiatric hold on me.
Wow.
So I think about what the standards are in Texas. My head's clearing a little bit, and I'm a lawyer.
Right.
And so I made it clear to the psychiatrist, I'm not a danger to myself. I'm not a danger to others. And so much to the chagrin of my brothers, they couldn't hold me.
Wow.
And I refused to go to treatment. And here's privilege. I could have gone to treatment anywhere in the world from right there. They'd have driven me to the airport. I refused. And again, that's massive privilege. And I would be disingenuous not to acknowledge that I have always had privilege. And I still have privilege. And so they drove me back home. We did what I call the Cuban rehab. They said, stay in your house for 2 weeks and everything's going to be okay. That's not how addiction works.
Right.
And so I stayed, and my thought to that was, well, my drug dealer delivers, no problem. Right. So stayed in my house for 2 weeks. The drug dealer came to me, the parties came to me, and then I was right back out. And my solution to all that was, now that my brothers knew, was just a distance from my family. I would stop seeing my brothers. I would no longer see my nieces and nephews. I would no longer hang out with people who didn't do what I do. And
Right.
so I kind of completely retreated into a world of addiction and only people who use.
Right.
And right back at it, And then in the summer of more failed marriages in there. And then in the summer of 2000, or the January 2006, I was out at one of my week-long birthday parties every January that began when the cocaine baggies came and ended a week later when we ran out of cocaine. Sometimes it was in Miami, sometimes it was in Vegas, and some was in Dallas.
Right.
And I'm out celebrating my birthday, and I met this girl. Her name's Amanda, and we started talking, and I was able to convince her that I was this upstanding person. You know, she didn't know anything about my problems, very light drinker, didn't do drugs. And
Right.
we started dating. And I remember and she moved in with me. And I remember one of my friends asking me, uh, saying, Brian, you do what you do. She doesn't do what you do. How's that going to work? And I said, well, I'm going to stop now. So I'm starting to think about it, right? My
Right.
life is no longer, at this point, my life is no longer fun. There's a saying about cocaine, it's fun till it's not.
Right.
And it had stopped being fun for me a long time ago. But what's addiction? Obsessive compulsive drug seeking behavior in the face of known and probable consequences. My entire life had become about that next line was going to recapture the fun. The next line was going to be that line in the bathroom in 1987 where I was going to look in the mirror and love Brian.
Right.
But that next line was never coming. It was always pain and shame.
Right.
And so Easter weekend, 2007, she went away to visit her parents. I went out with some friends searching for that next line again. She didn't know anything about any of this. You know, I had a PhD, and this isn't unusual. I talked to lots of lawyers who are struggling with cocaine or alcohol, and their family knows nothing, and they're married with kids.
Wow.
You know, you get very good at
Right.
deceit and lies, and
Wow.
you have a PhD in concealment, right? I had a JD,
Right.
but you have a PhD in concealment, and so I'm thinking, okay, a couple days will pass and I'll be cleaned up. She'll come home. It was 2 days later, and I blacked out. And the next thing I know, she's looking down at me. It's Sunday, and I blacked out. And there's cocaine everywhere, and the place is a mess. I'm trying to look around, trying to explain this law and order. You know, what excuse can I come up with to explain this law and order orgy of evidence
Right.
that I might not be the person I represented myself to be?
Right.
Right. And we ended up going back to the same psychiatric hospital, and we're standing in the parking lot, now me for the second time in my life. And she's crying. And several things occurred to me. One, she was going to leave. I'd leave. She didn't leave. She stood by me. And we dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust. And now we've been together going on 17 years.
Oh, wow.
We've
Congratulations.
been married going on 6. Thanks. So not all relationships will survive that. But ours was able to, one, because she's a saint, and two, because I had to do the work for me, right?
Right.
Because people do leave. Parents die. Pets die. Trauma happens. And they are all triggers for relapse, right?
Right.
Trauma. Strong trauma trigger for strong relapse. And
Right.
so another thing occurred to me in that parking lot. There wouldn't be a third trip back. I'd be dead. And one more thing occurred to me. I thought about something my father said to Mark, Jeff, and I growing up in Pittsburgh. And my father, who is the greatest generation, he was a CB. He fought in the Battle of Okinawa. He fought in Korea. And as I said, he and his older brother, Marty, operated a trim shop, reupholstering car seats in the same spot in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania from the end of the Korean War till his older brother passed away in 99. And he would say to us, and my father was the middle of 3 boys like me.
Right.
He said, guys, no matter what happens, no matter where you go in life, always pick up that phone, call your brother, tell your brother you love him, and ask your brother if there's anything you can do.
Wow.
And that was the relationship he had with his brothers.
Right.
And he was giving us the gift, the one gift he had to give other than his love.
Right.
Because he was not a wealthy man.
Right.
He was giving us the gift of family.
Right.
And if you want to know how that gift stuck, all these decades later, 1,200 miles, Dallas to Pittsburgh, Mark, Jeff, and I live walking distance to each other. That's not an accident.
Right.
Until my father passed in 2018, he lived across the street from me. That's not an accident. And I didn't want to lose my family.
Right.
And so I decided it was time. So the next day, I walked into the psychiatrist's office, who I'd been treating with. Uh, again, privilege. I was able to pay for a psychiatrist, but I'd been lying to. Well, why'd you lie to your psychiatrist? Shame knows no hourly rate, right? I was ashamed.
Right.
And we talked about residential treatment. I still refused to go. My ego is way up here. And I finally decided I would go to 12-step because I knew I had to do something. I wanted to show my now wife. I wanted to show my brothers. And it wasn't even about showing me. And that's okay, because whatever triggers the recovery is fine, whether it's fear or whatever else, right?
Right.
That may not sustain a long-term recovery, but whatever triggers the first step into the room is okay, right?
Right.
You just hope it's a trigger that hasn't hurt somebody, killed somebody, maimed
Right.
somebody. And so I decided that I would go to 12-step. And again, the most well-known is AA, but there are others.
Right.
And so April 8th, 2007, I walked in the rooms of 12-step and I sat down. And when I sat down, I wasn't thinking about whether I was an alcoholic, and I was crying and I smelled. I even remember the clothes I was wearing that day. And I was wearing this long blue shirt down to my cap, down to my below my waist, and jeans. And they were both soaked with sweat. And I remember thinking that if sitting in this chair, this uncomfortable hunk of plastic, would allow me for the first time in my life to get up in the morning and walk to the mirror, birthday suit naked, look at my reflection, and love myself for the first time, and now over 40 years, without the aid of alcohol or drugs, I would do that. I would sit. And I sat and I sat and I sat. And I'm still in therapy today. I have 15 and a half years in long-term recovery, free of drugs, alcohol, and eating disorders.
Congratulations on that.
That's my story.
Wow. That's tough, man. And going through all that, the stuff that you've gone through. Let me ask you this. So now, if somebody was to come to you and they wanted advice on how they could, maybe they're struggling with the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of advice would you give to someone else that's going through that?
I'm very careful with advice. Because I'm only an expert in my own story, right?
Right.
I'm not a doctor. I'm not, it really irks me when I see people saying you need to do this, this, and this, or you won't recover. I don't know, right? I mean, there are as many recovery paths as there are people. Some people think 12 steps the only way. I don't believe that. It was for me. It was right for me.
Right.
But what I do is I would ask. I say, well, where do you see? What do you want to see happen in your life? How's your family? How's work? How's your relationship? How are your interpersonal relationships? How are your intimate relationships? And so, with all those things, what do you want to see happen, right?
Right.
Whether it's alcohol, are you looking to stop? Are you looking to cut back? And if it's just to cut back, what do you think you need to cut back to so you can reach all these pinnacles that you want to reach, right? And have this best life.
Right.
And on all these different pillars, family, work, and all these different things. I would never say you need to do this, this, or this. And then I would say, here are the options I'm aware of.
Right. And that's you bring up another point too, is because in order for somebody to be able to make those changes, they first have to want to make those changes.
Yeah, I mean, sure. You have to want them, sure. You have to want them. But people, you have to remember, there are 5 stages of change. Mm-hmm. The first one is thinking about it, right? Is thinking about it, wanting it. It's like when I talked about how the guy asked me about how I was going to, work my addiction with my now wife, because she didn't know about any of this. Well, and I said, well, I want to stop. That's the first stage of change. You're thinking about it. And people move in and out of the stages of change. So wanting it isn't always enough, right? You can want it and then not want it.
Right.
So what I try to focus on, look, whether you want it, don't want it, you move in and out of the stages and change, whether you're going to do harm reduction with Suboxone or methadone, whether you think you can come back. People go bananas when I use this one. If you think cutting back from a gram of cocaine to a line a week and you want to do that, and you think your life that you're going to hit all the pillars of your life, well, tell me what your plan is to do that.
Right.
And then after a month, we'll say, okay, is that working for you? Well, no, not really. And okay, what else? What else can we try? What do you know? What else can we talk about? So
Right.
I don't set absolutes. I don't judge any path to recovery.
Right.
I'm not a person who says you're either abstinent or you're not in recovery. I'm not a person who says, if you're smoking weed, well, if you're in 12 step for alcohol and you're smoking weed, you're not sober. I think that's all bullshit. Okay.
Right.
I think that's all people insecure with their own recovery.
Right.
Recovery looks different for everyone. But I can tell you, for me, abstinence was the only way.
Right.
There was no such thing as one drink and one line of cocaine, or one line of cocaine and just one drink.
Right.
And so, that was for me.
Let me ask you this: was there maybe a pivotal moment that you went through that you're like, you know what, I have to change? There's no more playing against.
I was standing in that parking lot with my wife at the psychiatric hospital.
Right.
Well, I didn't want to die.
Right.
I didn't want to die. Yeah, and in 2005 I wanted to die. In 2007 I didn't.
Right. Right.
And so I just it was there.
At that moment, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, whenever you had that moment, what kind of things did you start doing for yourself? Yeah, I mean, to make.
Well, I went through all the ritual things. It's like you delete. You go through all these ritual things, especially you learn these things in 12 step too. You delete your drug dealer's number. Well, I know it off by heart, so deleting it really doesn't matter. I changed my phone number.
Right.
I got rid of all the alcohol in my house and all that stuff. I immediately cut out all the people I did drugs with, every single one, and got back to the people who truly cared about me, who the very small core of people who I'd known for decades.
Right.
Who truly cared about my well-being. And those are still my friends today. Right. Very small group, very small. And so those were the changes I made. And again, I stayed in therapy, and it was hard, especially the first 2 months. I was very insecure. Is my wife, is she going to leave me? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And you have the pool, right?
Right.
You're sitting at home alone and thinking, okay, I can make that call. Okay, I could go to that bar. But if you do that, what are you giving up? What am I giving up? Right? For that moment, what am I giving up for that moment? I am giving up my family, my wife, my self-respect. And so fortunately, that always won out. And I went to a lot of 12-step meetings. I was going to 2 a day.
Wow.
To fill that vacant time.
Right. So, that makes sense, because you went through that struggle for over 40 years. That's a long time to go through, Well, I was saying it wouldn't be 40 altogether, but quite a while.
I'm still in therapy today. I went through the overall struggle for decades, right? Self-image. And self-image can be a trigger to a lot of different things. And so I'm still in therapy today. Not everything is rewired overnight.
Right. So now that that you've been clean, what kind of led you to find your passion and your purpose now?
A clear head.
A clear head.
A clear head. When I cleared my head and I began to rebuild my sense of self, I realized the things that I was passionate about and that I was not passionate about. I'm not passionate about the practice of law. I haven't practiced in over 15 years. Right. I was passionate about expression, and I always had opinions. And at first I blogged, and there was very angry blogging and things like that. And I finally came to a point where, I wrote my first book. And my first book was this obscure self-published book called Shattered Image, about my struggle with eating disorders. Right. And then I wrote The Addicted Lawyer, which has been very popular with lawyers and law students. And then I decided to dip my toe into fiction, and I wrote The Ambulance Chaser.
Wow.
And that's what I enjoy doing. I'm not always motivated to do it, but I'm always thinking about it, and I always enjoy doing it. And when I do it, I enjoy it.
Right. So you work on a second part to the ambulance chaser, right?
Yeah, it's called The Body Brokers. I'm working on the sequel. I'm about 15,000 words in.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm excited that you're doing a sequel to
Yeah.
this book. So and that's kind of how I met you. Is you're on LinkedIn. You it started the ambulance chaser
Yeah.
group on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, and so shared a little bit about the book, and then the book you got the book published. Um, so that's kind of how I met you, and then heard a little bit about your story, and I was like, I gotta have this guy on. I gotta have him.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I wanted to get to know you because hearing your story, it's just so powerful. And like you said, people know Mark, in his journey, but I think that that your journey, so many people can also just relate to. They can relate to it, and maybe they don't, share it outwards. But people, who are struggling, especially the way you started with self-image. I think that that's huge, especially now. I think that mental health and depression and all that has been. I say it's been brought to light more since the pandemic. And to have people out, like you come in and share your story and all the things that you've gone through. That's huge, especially for the young kids that are facing it today. So and I'm hoping that be able to hear your story and what you went through can actually will reach them and help them at a younger age go look for the help.
Well, there are a lot of stories of resilience out there. So, I'm just one, and there are many.
Right. But hearing your story, and and what it led you through all throughout the decades, if we could stop it at the beginning of the story, what I mean, with the whole self-image, maybe if there was something out there for you, I mean, you wouldn't
You
have
know
to
what?
go through.
I don't believe it. I call it revisionist recovery. It got me talking to you. The path got me talking to you, right? The path has me, married close to 7 years. The path has me on a good, relationship with my brothers and all kinds of wonderful things. So the path is the path.
Right.
There's only, there's only one requirement for recovery, right? And you talk about wanting, it's not to want it. Be above ground.
Right.
Just be above ground. Stay alive.
Right. Wow. So yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story, and I'm really glad you are able to come in and share that story with us too. And I'm glad that you were able to recover and get over. Not honestly get through some of the stuff that you were dealing with too. Because the other option with that is if you continue doing it that way, you may not be here today.
That is true. I probably would not be.
So I'm glad that that you saw whatever was the trigger that turned you around. I'm glad it happened.
Thank you.
So
I appreciate you having me on.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And then let's tell the audience a little bit about your books. Where can
Sure. My novel and my novel, The Ambulance Chaser, which opened up when it was released last December. It opened as the #1 debut selling debut fiction novel.
Wow.
So yeah, I was right there on Books Sold. I was sandwiched between Stephen King and John Grisham. Now, of course, it didn't last because they continue to sell a lot of books, right? But it was pretty cool for 1 week. My wife gave me the chart as a birthday present. Oh, wow. And so you can find either of them on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And The Addicted Lawyer, which is my memoir.
Okay, and then you just started the new one. So once you finish the new one, what we'll do is we'll put a link under your interview, and that way, if they want to join the Ambulance Chaser group or want to follow you and see when the new book that comes out, and even get a hold of the older book, we'll have links on the page for that.
That sounds great.
So what are your plans going forward? Are you just living it day by day, or what's your
I
goal
mean,
now?
yeah, my wife and I, we like to travel. We do different things, and we're not, we're kind of homebodies,
Right,
and and we see our family, so we live with a fairly tight circle of just, family, and we're just not very social people,
right. Okay,
and that's for me that's great,
right,
because that's I've seen the other side, been there, done that.
right. Well, cool, man. Well, again, like
And plus, I'm going to be 60. I'm going to be 62 soon. I'm too, you know.
you're still young, man. 62 is
uh,
still young. You still have a long life ahead of you, brother.
yeah, that's right.
So again, thank you so much for being on the show. Like I said, I've been really looking forward to having you on and having you to be able to share this story. So, I really appreciate you doing that.
Thanks for having me on, man. Let me know when you publish it.
Okay, I definitely will. All right,
All right,
guys.
you take care. Have a nice week.
You too. Thank you guys
Bye
for
bye.
joining us. Remember, just hit that subscribe, um, follow, like, share, hit the notification so that you can know when we have our new shows up. And until next week or the next show, remember, you are uniquely designed with a purpose, and always keep moving forward. Peace.